welcome. Okay.
No, do you have any opening remarks, or should I just jump?
Well, that was, I sat through, I hadn't seen the film for quite a while. What a beautiful theater, of course, but it's so nice to see this projection and to see the film. So, thank you for that.
Azazel, when I first heard the title of this film, I wonder if it was somehow inspired by King Lear and his three daughters, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. And now that I've seen it, and you've seen it, your movie feels like kind of King Lear in reverse. The daughters are not trying to prove to their father how worthy they are. They're trying to prove to themselves how worthy they are as daughters. And even if I'm totally off base, is that close to what you were thinking in terms of what the dynamics between the sisters was?
I don't think it's off base. It's the way that I saw it was that saying his three daughters would address that it was always going to, that was the thing that was looming over them, that they were seeing each other through this prism, and that it was also a way for me to address that I was, in some ways, thinking that the father is overseeing this whole thing, and he even kind of references at the end a conversation. So it's really just making him present, and also in some other way addressing that it is that I'm a man and that I wrote this, and that there's this ultimately coming from those eyes as well.
I'm curious if you ever considered the father not appearing. Was it always going to be that he would have his moment?
It wasn't planned out at all, but it really also wasn't planned out in terms of when I was writing. I just wrote this very much forward, and with the opening scene and just kind of going all the way until suddenly they were going into the room. I definitely had this idea that I would always keep. We wouldn't go into the room. I knew that much. That was like my one thing, which was like I definitely didn't want to go in and try to do a dying scene in that way that I felt that I couldn't do in a very honest way or in a way that I wasn't interested in. But them emerging from the room with the father was a surprise to me while I was writing, and it was something that scared me, and then it got me really excited, and then I just desperately wanted to hear what he had to say. And then I've come to really appreciate having this fantasy that you get the chance to say, I'm sorry and I love you, and here's something you don't know about me, whether it's a fantasy or not, even if it's a fantasy.
This is a question for both you and Elizabeth. This story unfolds under very claustrophobic conditions, basically one set. But I'm really not talking about the physical claustrophobia of the apartment. I'm also referring to its occupants kind of being overcrowded emotionally and psychically, I guess. So first, Elizabeth, how did that environment affect you as an actor when you're really, basically, the floor plan of this stage is about the size of your set?
I think it's always really
A little closer.
Sorry. Closer.
There you go.
Closer. I think it's always really helpful to have anything practical to use as an actor, and there's I don't know, I don't know what, I'm sorry, I don't know what more to say than that. I'm like, I just watched the movie for the first time in over a year, so
Wow.
I'm gonna be bad at this Q&A. And I'm sorry, because we've done like 32 of these exactly. And I'm like kind of at a loss of how to communicate. Sorry, not because I'm like overwhelmed by my own performance, but because you start thinking about the day you were shooting things, and I think about when you say the confines of the space, I just think it's a gift to shoot in a real apartment. You know, we were dealing with the neighbor playing the piano and asking them to quiet down. We were dealing with people on a Friday night in New York City being really loud, and Natasha screaming out the window, "Hey, we're making a movie, will you be quiet?" So like there was the energy of like the practicality of the city that was a part of every stage of this. And for the claustrophobia of it, I guess that's really just in the writing and the rhythm. And Ozzy wrote this with a pacing in his head, and so we had 3 days before we started shooting where we could at least figure out what that rhythm was for him. And I do think the pacing is part of the claustrophobia, is part of the anxious energy or neuroses or the way these people avoid one another by words or something. You know, it's all in the writing, which I think creates that sense of claustrophobia, and then these pauses he creates specifically for Christina to try and figure out how to create her own space as much as she can when she can, whether that's through an app or a yoga or sitting on a chair quietly. And so I think it was all in the writing, really, that claustrophobia, and it's just nice to interact with practical things.
That was an excellent answer. You did have an
It was
answer for it.
spritzed out.
It
for
was a great
second,
answer.
and I'm back.
Also, what about you and how you direct and where you even work with your cinematographer, where you can put the camera, because you don't have a fly-off roof, you don't have moving walls.
I think that there was one of the things that I really appreciated watching this time was just watching the light shift in the apartment. And I remember Sam Levy, who's the cinematographer, just embracing that's something that we weren't going to be able to control. So like even the second scene where the light really shifts on Carrie as she's looking out the window, or the light that goes, like, let's just imagine when Lizzie's out on the bench and there's like, it just lights up at this point. You know, there just was a lack of control that we had to let into that now I see. I mean, even when we watched it, we just started embracing that was like, it felt like it was working with the story, those shifts. So a lot of it never felt like something that really impeded us. I think it was so wonderful to have a warm space to go to the city, to be together. I feel like it made us connected as a cast and a crew really, really quickly. It meant that we could just keep shooting, really, like we're always shooting. There was no time for somebody to disappear and go back. It was just that we were always in production, which I think that stopping and slowing down and kind of moving locations is something that I wrestled with in terms of just keeping up, like where are we going, what's the rhythm we're chasing.
This is a question for Elizabeth and Diaz. Your character wears a t-shirt with a small hole in it. Maybe it's a comfortable t-shirt, maybe she didn't notice it had a hole in it, maybe she didn't have any fucking time to do the laundry, but even if it's a random things can sometimes be planned. And I'm curious about your wardrobe, even that t-shirt, that looks super comfortable. Did the wardrobe that Diaz selected for you speak to your character, and what did you learn from the character when you started putting on her clothes?
I mean, it was, so Diaz has been, I'm going to think she,
Closer again.
sorry, gosh, darn it. I think Diaz is, oh goodness gracious. Diaz is very good to speak to how close she was to this project, because she was with Oz every step of the way. And so by the time it came to our first fitting within those few days of the rehearsal we had leading up to shooting, I feel like Diaz was already a part of the conversation without even having one, because they have already been so in sync every process of the way, and so it seemed like there was an easy communication, collaboration with the clothes, but also like how are we all different from one another yet related, and I think there's like a bit of like a Colorado-ness or something to Christina's wardrobe, but also something from her past, things that she found in the apartment. There was that kind of us trying to figure out what that journey was, of like what was there and what she brought with her. I don't know, Diaz, how do you feel about
Along the same lines, I mean, they're traveling light, so they're not gonna have a lot of costume changes. But how did you divide up the sisters in terms of color and fit? And how did you go about, were you building things? Were you buying? Were you thrift shopping? Where were you finding
It
more?
happened so long ago. The t-shirt is mine.
There you
So
go.
I often bring myself into the characters and they come into me as well. So I leave with their clothes and they leave with my clothes. But as I remember the conversations that I was having with Azazel before I actually sat with the actresses, it was about how to make them feel lived in, but at the same time, for me, it's important that, yes, it's lived in, but it's like a little bit above the ground, so that it has like a fantasy to it, and that was the intention with the production design and the clothes, and that they were going to be in a lot of the same clothes for 3 days, but at the same time, I wanted there to be these few changes that distinguished who they are as people.
Azazel, I'm not a big believer in this manufactured idea of closure because I think grief definitely has a beginning. Sometimes it has a middle, but it often never has an end. But I do think that art can help us process loss and help us understand ourselves and reconcile us to the people we've lost and to each other. And when I think about some books I've read recently that have really affected me, I'm thinking about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and H is for Hawk and Train Dreams. And I'm wondering if art was part of your healing process, and was the making of this movie part of that healing process?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is a personal story of both like own, very close to me and friends' stories, and just kind of going through this. But a lot of this is just me dealing with like what I fear and I anticipate as things just sort of became very real in terms of just my parents' age and just situations. So I would say that it was a way for me to deal with grief, but really by bringing in something so joyful and bringing in like people that I respect and love and care and I'm inspired by. So it was almost the opposite. It was a refuge, much more than anything. I don't know what this film will be for me on the other side of like my parents passing, but I don't think I would be able to tell it. I know that I wouldn't be able to tell it this way. So it was a way for me to kind of celebrate this moment beforehand with something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed being on set. I enjoyed editing. It was always a refuge for me.
Was the father speaking about what he wanted to say you, in a way, and not having that regret?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, after living here for a long time, coming back to New York City, like that is something that I walk around and just like was so amazed by the things that are surviving, much more than the things that had gone. Like and the feeling of like the memories on each block. Bliss is somebody extremely important to me that's no longer with us, who I wanted to give thanks to. I wanted to kind of, so, I mean, yes, there's a lot in there, but also like, when he's talking about going to the Coast Guard, my father went to the Coast Guard, like a lot of the stories all mixed up in these ways that I'm not totally sure. But I also I would just say that this whole process was me trying not to second guess anything and just kind of going, okay, this feels correct, this feels compelling to me and necessary.
My father-in-law was in the Coast Guard. This is for Elizabeth. There is little time wasted in this movie on backstories and exposition, particularly for Katie and Christina. We know very little about their lives outside of what happens on screen. And as an audience member, and I think I speak for most people, we don't really need to know. But as an actor, do you need to know? You need to know her backstory, even if it's not in the script, and you have conversations with Azazel about her story and what happened to her and who she was in the minutes and years preceding her arrival at this apartment.
I think I would answer that question differently depending on the project. I think, and also like how much time you have leading up to one. I think, this script is so strong that if Carrie Coon were here, I think she would say, she speaks to, in your really good writing, you just have to play the scene in the moment. And she was also coming off another job, and she has 2 kids. I happen to not have children, and I was not coming off an immediate job. And so I was coming from a job where I had source material, and I missed having source material to go off of, whether it's a book or articles, journals, letters, things that you can use as a jumping off point. And for this, we never explicitly say even where she moved to, what she does for a living. And so things like that, I think, help inform who a character is and their behaviors, and also this Grateful Dead element of her life. I, got as close to watching Buck Henry's documentary made for TV of the Grateful Dead shows from, I don't know, is that like the 80s or something? that we found on YouTube. That's like as far as I could go to a Grateful Dead show personally. So there was some invention that I actually found really helpful and questions that I had for Ozza, and so I guess for this it was fun for me to do it more than anything, and I had the time to. And I think it could be helpful. It could also be completely useless because my job as an actor is to just convince you of something, and however I get there or we get there, like hopefully it doesn't really matter what we did. It just whatever is on there, it could be complete invention, or it could be months of work, or a last minute decision. I think our job is to convince you. I don't know. That's a horrible answer.
It's not at all. But Azazel, I assume the actors have very different ways of working. Some are going to do a lot of research. Some are just going to, say, let's go. How do you create an environment on set where everybody has their own space to work the way they want to?
Well, I can't underestimate how important that background is for me. Just figuring out what that background is, so that, and that's something that that since Diaz and I work so closely together, that conversation of just where is this world from? How is this grounded? Where is this not grounded? How does this relate to us? How does it not to? Where are these things coming from? That gives me a lot of, that just gives me something, I have answers then. And it's always there if an actor wants it. But generally, it's completely different. Everybody works very, very different. I think so much of directing, at least with this one, was just trying to stay out of the way, realize when I needed to stay out of the way, when somebody was working out something that they needed to work out on their own, and also just trying to figure out when was a good time to jump in if I could be helpful, if things felt lost in a way that was going some other direction. That was the way to gauge things.
Yes, there are inherent limitations in the story, and I suspect in the production. You're basically in one location, so you have the limitations of space. You have just a few speaking roles, so you can't have a character come in and explain something and never to be seen again. The story unfolds over a limited number of days. You probably didn't have that many days to shoot. So how did those limitations work for or maybe against the production? If necessity was the mother of invention, what do those limitations mean for making this movie?
They worked for the production in every way because it brought us closer together, and it made it so that we had to be very specific. And because we were shooting on film, there was no second guessing what we were doing. Let's shoot all of this extra stuff so then we can cut it in the edit and make something. So it was super planned out. We didn't, we can tell you, we didn't have a lot of takes, but I don't think you guys felt like there wasn't enough takes.
Never. We also like we had enough time, even if it was fewer setups.
So everything was meaningful and there for a reason, and I felt like the script, the way that Azazel really wrote it and planned it out, and what made me pour my heart into this film was that it was all on the page already. The way that he was going to cut it, the way that, he found the film with the DP, of course, with Sam Levy, but even the camera shots and how we were going to begin with the white wall and how the sisters were not going to be in the same frame for a reason. They're all part of this different world, and then once the story unfolds, the apartment unfolds. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think also the thing that I would jump in is that because of what Sam and I were planning in terms of just being so slice here, slice here, slice here, and even with the scenes how they kind of don't have transitions for so long because I'm just very purposeful of trying to present things, especially in the beginning, present it in the way that I felt like people present themselves when they gather in this situation. So it meant not only unveiling the apartment in this very specific way and unveiling these characters in a specific way, but it meant everything that they're wearing, everything that they're sitting on, who's sitting on this chair could tell us some part of the story that we're not maybe necessarily completely above the surface, but was saying something that even maybe the characters don't realize that they're saying. So I was just looking at that shirt that Rachel wears, the puppy shirt. It's like she can't express herself it's
The eyes.
the eyes,
The
and-
dog, they're Natasha's
like it's
eyes.
what she can't say this thing to her sisters, but she's right there on her chest, and that was something that we really talked about and went through, and just try to figure out like, okay, could this be subtle enough and at the same time be overt enough that you could feel things like that?
I want to ask about these tiny, small, telling moments that you give all of your characters. Carrie Coon's first glass of wine. Elizabeth Olsen, Elizabeth, your first call home. Natasha Lyonne's first moment on the bench. As you're writing these moments, are you visualizing them? Because there's not much said in those moments. Carrie doesn't say much when she drinks her wine, but they speak volumes to who these people are and what their concerns are and what their life is.
To a degree, I definitely remember having this conversation with Carrie, being like, you've been looking forward to this glass of wine this whole time, and you were just thinking that it's going to happen on the other side of this, but suddenly there's a good reason to jump into it right now. And then she just said, like, so I was like, so I really want to see that on your first sip, and she was like, oh, I got this. I know exactly. She's like, you don't have to say anything, like, I'll do it. And wow, I still get that moment, the way she takes it, and she just sits with it. It's so, and the way that Lizzie watches her, like that was the other conversation, was just like you seeing that this is the beginning of something else that she's very familiar with, and that starts off, and she's just watching, like, okay, this is what is this stage gonna be. Then the phone call, the first phone call, was, it had so much to do with the framing as well, that we were like, these pants that were very specific to Christina, that the colors that were starting with these childhood photos, that she's over there, that she's kind of like, the frame moves like behind her. These were all things that we kind of more or less worked out while we were shooting, that it wasn't going to just stay with her, it was kind of just lag right behind her, and that it would find her, and then we'd really kind of go into this experience where when she gets on to, talks to her daughter, she'll sink down to her daughter's level. Like, these were all ways that we could really kind of have fun and show something different. And then the bench with Rachel was just like, it was very, very cold while we're shooting. There was Victor, Jose Phoebus, that was his first, and this is his first film.